All right, let's get started with another deep dive. Today we're looking at Jet.AI Inc., ticker symbol JTAI. And I have to say, this company, they're aiming to shake things up in the private aviation industry, using AI, no less. You actually sent over a bunch of research on them,
A
so
lot of material.
yeah, we're going to try to help you make sense of it all. And really, does this align with a value investing philosophy?
Right.
So we'll be taking a deep dive into their business model, really looking closely at those financials. And we're also going to examine kind of what the market thinks of this ambitious company.
All the source material that you provided is linked in the show notes, of course.
Yeah, Jet.AI's, their approach is really kind of intriguing, right? I mean, they're not just selling flights, they're building AI software to optimize the entire private aviation experience, like from start to finish.
Let's unpack that a bit. So Jet.AI, they have two main branches, is that right? So they've got their software side, and they also operate a fleet of private jets. Exactly, yeah. On the software side, they have their app, CharterGPT, which uses AI to just really simplify private jet bookings. And then they also have their AI, Ava, which you can actually text to book a flight. So it's really trying to streamline a process that has traditionally been very complex and time-consuming.
It sounds pretty slick, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like they're really trying to make private jet travel more accessible
Right.
to a wider audience. But they're not just a tech company, are they?
No, not at all. They actually manage and operate a fleet of Honda jets and Cessna Citations, so they are very much involved in providing the actual private aviation services.
Oh, okay. So,
And that's where the two come together, right?
Hmm.
The software is meant to drive efficiency and enhance the customer experience, while the aviation side, they're delivering that real-world service.
That's interesting. Okay, so it sounds like seamless integration of technology and service, right? But how does that actually translate into revenue? How do they make money?
So it's a little more, it's not as simple as just selling flights, right? They offer jet card memberships, they sell empty legs, which are those, return flights that might otherwise be empty, and they even have a carbon offsetting platform, which is pretty interesting. So it's kind of it's a multifaceted approach to generating income.
Okay, all right. So it sounds like they're really trying to kind of tap into different segments of the market and diversify their revenue streams, which makes sense. Now, when it comes to value investing, I think we both agree that assessing the management team, that's really crucial. What's the story with Jet.AI's leadership? What do we know about them?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag with their management team, right? On the one hand, they've shown a lot of innovation. They've secured some strategic partnerships,
Okay.
including a very secretive one with a major tech giant to boost their AI capabilities. And they've also been very successful at raising capital.
A secret partnership. Why is it a secret?
Yeah, they haven't revealed who it is yet.
Wow, that's interesting.
So it's hard to say for sure, Could be a strategic move to keep their edge, or maybe they're just waiting for the right time to really unveil it for that maximum impact. Who knows?
Right.
But on the other hand, it does raise some questions about transparency.
It definitely does, because transparency is super important when you're thinking about investing in a company, right? So, okay, before we get too far down that rabbit hole, let's talk about the company's financials, right? We've got to look at the numbers.
Yeah.
Their recent reports, they show some losses, and that negative gross margin of negative 4.18%, that really kind of jumps out.
Yeah, that definitely catches your eye.
So what does that mean?
It means that for every dollar of revenue they generate, it's actually costing them more than $1 to deliver their services, right? So they're spending more than they're bringing in, which obviously raises a big red flag about their current path to profitability.
Oh, okay. So that's definitely something to think about. And then we also noticed, they've been issuing a lot of new shares to raise capital, right? So how does that impact the existing shareholders? What happens when a company does that?
So that's what we call shareholder dilution.
Okay.
And essentially it's like, you have this pie, and every time they issue new shares, they're cutting that pie into more slices, right? So each slice represents a smaller portion of the overall ownership.
So you're getting a smaller piece.
Exactly. And this is something investors really need to be aware of because it can directly impact the value of their shares, especially, like you said, when the company isn't demonstrating, really strong financial performance.
Yeah, so not great, especially when they're already showing losses and that negative gross margin.
Exactly, yeah. It all kind of adds up.
All right, so definitely some red flags there. But we're not done yet. We still have a lot more to unpack when it comes to Jet.AI. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break.
It's worth noting, though, that, companies that are in these growth phases, they often do prioritize expansion and capturing market share over, that immediate profitability.
That's true. That's a good point. It's still a gamble, though, right? I mean, investors really need to kind of weigh those risks carefully. So we've talked about their business model. We've looked at the financials. What's the overall market sentiment like? What are people saying about Jet.AI?
It's kind of a mixed bag, honestly. Analyst price targets are all over the place. Some are super bullish, others are, much more cautious. And then recent news has also kind of sent the stock on a bit of a roller coaster ride.
Okay, so it sounds like the market's still trying to decide, right? Is Jet.AI this high-flying opportunity, or are they headed for a nosedive? And actually, we even found that there's a significant short interest in the stock.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that means, some investors are actually betting against Jet.AI's success.
Interesting. So short selling, that's always can be seen as a bearish indicator. It suggests that at least some investors believe that the stock price is, overvalued and likely to decline.
Okay, so more risk there, potentially.
Exactly. But it's important to remember, too, that short selling, it's a risky strategy in itself.
Yeah, for sure.
Those investors could be proven wrong.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it's a complex picture, right? When you're looking at the market sentiment, definitely a lot to consider there. Now, let's move on and talk about Jet.AI's ownership structure. So who are the major players? Who's holding the reins here?
Yeah, so one thing that stood out to me is the relatively low institutional ownership. It's, hovering around 3%, which could suggest a lack of confidence from those big investment firms.
Okay, interesting. So on the flip side, though, insider ownership is actually higher, right? It's closer to 5%.
Yeah, around there.
So does that mean, that the people running the company have more faith in its long-term prospects?
It could. It could indicate that insiders believe in the company's vision and they're, holding on to their shares. But it's also worth noting that ownership is quite concentrated. So that means that a relatively small number of entities control a large portion of those shares, which can, sometimes raise concerns about corporate governance.
That's a really good point because, as investors, we always want to consider how that ownership structure, how might that influence the decision-making?
Exactly.
And ultimately, how does that affect risk? So speaking of risk, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the potential headwinds that Jet.AI might face, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a SWOT analysis is always a helpful framework for evaluating a company's, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Okay, let's do it.
So let's start with the strengths, right? Jet.AI's use of AI to streamline private aviation, it's a major advantage, right? They're really tapping into this growing desire for, a more efficient and accessible private travel experiences.
And their focus on sustainability, too, right? That's something that really kind of stood out to me. They have that carbon offsetting platform and this commitment to eco-conscious practices. I feel like that could really appeal to, a growing segment of environmentally conscious consumers.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, looking at opportunities, their expansion into the military defense sector, that's a pretty bold move, right?
It is.
Could potentially open up this huge new market.
Yeah.
But it also brings a new layer of, complexity and risk, of course.
High stakes, for sure.
Yeah.
So what about their weaknesses? What are some of the challenges that they need to address?
I think, we talked about it before, but their current financial performance, particularly those negative gross margins and operating losses, it's definitely a key weakness, right? They're burning through cash, and their investments haven't yet translated into profitability.
So they really need to show a clear path towards becoming profitable to really gain, investor confidence.
Absolutely. What about threats? What do you see as the biggest threats on the horizon for them?
Well, I think the most significant threat is just the intense competition, right?
Oh, for sure.
In the private aviation market, you've got these established players with deep pockets, extensive networks, a loyal customer base. Jet.AI really needs to, differentiate themselves, right? They got to capture market share in a really crowded field.
Yeah, it's the classic David versus Goliath scenario.
Right, exactly. They've got to be strategic, and they've got to be agile to succeed.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, right? We've unpacked their business model, analyzed those financials, looked at market sentiment, examined the ownership structure. We even did a SWOT analysis. Phew, I'm exhausted. What about you? So what are your final thoughts on Jet.AI?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating company. I'll give them that. They've got this bold vision, Their use of AI to really disrupt the private aviation industry. It's innovative. It's potentially game-changing.
Right.
But they are facing some, significant challenges, particularly when it comes to their financial performance and just that competitive landscape.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're walking this tightrope, right, between innovation and financial stability.
Exactly. For investors, it represents a high-risk, high-reward opportunity. This is a company that could soar to new heights, or it could potentially, stall out. So the million-dollar question: should someone invest in Jet.AI?
Well, it depends, right? It depends entirely on an individual's risk tolerance and their investment goals.
Okay.
For those who are comfortable with high-risk ventures and who truly believe in that long-term potential of Jet.AI's vision, it might be worth considering.
Right.
But it's crucial to conduct that thorough due diligence and to really understand those potential downsides.
Yeah, definitely not for the saint of heart. And remember, we promised you that big reveal about that secret partnership that Jet.AI has with a major tech company, right? So were you ready for it? The big reveal. Well, we did some digging, and it turns out we don't have that information yet.
Yeah, it remains a mystery.
So for now, it's just another piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
It makes Jet.AI such an intriguing company.
It really does. It speaks to, the dynamic and ever-evolving nature of this industry.
Definitely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Jet.AI, let's leave our listeners with a final kind of thought-provoking question. Do you think Jet.AI will ultimately, disrupt the aviation industry, or will they just kind of fade away?
It's a question worth pondering. They have a unique approach, a dedicated team, a really compelling vision,
Right.
but they also face, considerable challenges. Only time will tell, I guess, what the future holds for Jet.AI.
Exactly. And we want to hear from you, right? What were your biggest takeaways from this deep dive? Would you invest in Jet.AI based on what we've discussed? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, and if there's a company out there that has you curious, just leave a comment with your suggestion. We might just pick it for our next deep dive.
We might. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to all the research that we used. And if you want to explore, more fascinating companies and industries, be sure to subscribe to the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel.
We're constantly releasing new content to help you navigate the world of investing.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Jet.AI.
The preceding content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. All investments involve risk, and you should consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views of Stock Analytics AI. Artificial intelligence was used in the creation of this content.